For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
All right, looks like we are live and we are ready to dismantle some uniformitarianism and evolutionism, guys. We have Dr. Kent Hovind with us again tonight for this extremely important discussion. I am pumped. I think I can speak for all of us here when I say that we are incredibly thankful for all the amazing work Kent Hovind has done to defend the faith. Now, I want to point out, though, this isn't Kent's first time here on this channel. As a matter of fact, he has been generous enough to give us his time about 15 times. I've got a playlist titled Dr. Kent Hovind on Standing for Truth, where everybody can find all the debates and interviews Kent has had with us. Kent, I have been blown away by how well you demolish evolution in your many, many debates over the years. I'm curious, and actually, Dr. Hovind, you're muted, so to answer this question, you might want to unmute yourself. But I'm curious, how many debates have you had, roughly, in total?
226 by my count. And I'm open for any more. Tell all the atheists, give me a call, 855-BIG-DINO, extension 3. I'll take them all on same time.
It's getting harder and harder to find opponents. I'll tell you that much. Kent, you must be coming close to setting a record, it seems, on debates.
Well, no, Dwayne Gish did many more than that. I think well over 300.
Wow.
And yeah, I'd love to do more, but would you want to defend the idea that we all came from a rock which came from a dot of nothing for no reason?
No.
Okay,
No.
well, that's why they don't want to either.
It'd be an impossible win. Okay, so anyways, enough for me. I'm going to hand it over to Brother George here for a brief introduction before we get into a short presentation by Dr. Hovind on the Garden of Eden and the global flood of Noah, which will be followed up by questions from us and, of course, our awesome audience. So please, guys, make sure you're tagging me with your questions. As always, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So, Brother George, go ahead. Take it away.
Thank you, SFT. Dr. Hovind, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you and another stalwart, an Australian by the name of John McKay. Is there a bit of an echo there?
Sounds fine here.
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, I'll continue on. Well, we had John McKay about a month ago on this channel, and I would like to thank both of you for opening my eyes on the evolution topic. I was a theistic evolutionist. I was, like everyone else, trying to accept and combine the so-called science of evolution and my faith in Jesus. I recall one of the very first videos I watched was a debate you had on evolution. I was gobsmacked, to be honest. I had never heard those arguments before. Now, fast track 11 years later, and after countless videos, documentaries, books, I have some of your books, science papers, etc., and now I get to talk to you, and I want to thank you personally. A little plug. Dr. Hovind has some excellent material from videos to books. Ones I recommend amongst many others. I actually read these yesterday. Are You Being Brainwashed? And Help, I'm Being Taught Evolution in My Biology Class. This has an actual case where Dr. Hovind tutored a student by the name of Amy, actually two students, on how to deal with the education system and biology teacher in general. But before we get into your presentation, I would like to introduce you to a theory of mine. It's similar to the moon is made up of green cheese theory. I haven't actually tabled it in any science papers, but stay with me and you'll see where I'm going with this. In my example, it involves dinosaurs and chickens. Of course, we've all heard the plethora of theories on how the dinosaurs went extinct. We've heard of the flatulence, the asteroids, the climate change, the ozone layer, depletion, etc., etc. But here's how my theory involves the chickens. I believe dinosaurs went extinct because they tasted too much like chickens.
That sounds good to me.
People took a liking to chicken soup, roast chicken, fried chicken, barbecue chicken, and that's why dinosaurs went extinct. Okay. Now,
George, I got an idea. Why don't you apply to your government for a grant for $40 million to study that?
Sounds like a great idea. I think I'll do that.
They would probably grant it.
Now, for the benefit of those, I told you a little joke before we went on stream, but I'll tell it again because the audience haven't heard us. But I actually proved to Dr. Hovind how we can prove evolution wrong. This is how it goes. Everyone's heard of hummingbirds, right? Well, hummingbirds have existed for millions of years, and they haven't learnt the words yet. So that proves evolution wrong.
That's right.
Okay, after that failed attempt at humour, I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Hovind. I'm sure your jokes are better than mine, much better, actually.
No, I loved it. That was great. I'm going to use that one. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on the program again. I've been on here a couple of times, and I enjoy it. My name's Ken Hovind. I live in Lenox, Alabama, population 35. We are straight north of Pensacola, 70 miles, and we are building a dinosaur adventure land, a theme park, museum, science center, all based on science and the Bible. We want to give God the glory. The Bible says very clearly in the very first chapter, God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Well, what on earth is a firmament? I'll show you in a minute. And let it divide the waters from the waters. Some people say, hey, if it divides the water from the water, it must be the dirt, because that keeps the water away from the water. No. Keep reading, verse 20. Let the birds, the fowl, fly above the earth in the open firmament. So there it tells us the firmament is the air. And God said there would be lights in the firmament, and he made the stars. That is the second heaven. There's actually a third heaven mentioned in the Bible. Paul said he was caught up to the third heaven, 2 Corinthians. So Bible talks about the heavens, plural, declare the glory of God. There's more than one heaven, but that's another story. On my video series, I have 18 hours you get for $50 from drdino.com. Video number 2 is all about the Garden of Eden. What was it like? Number 1 is called The Age of the Earth, how to prove the earth is not billions of years old. Number 2 is all about the Garden of Eden. What was it like? Why did they live to be 900? I won't take an hour and a half to cover here like I did there, but you can get that video if you want more. So let me skip up to where I believe there was a crystalline canopy of ice, a couple inches thick, maybe 10 miles above the earth, giving the earth an even temperature everywhere. You could live at the North Pole or South Pole. It was even temperature everywhere. And the Bible says the earth was standing out of the water and in the water. So there was water above the air, I believe. And some creationists don't believe what's called the Canopy Theory. They're wrong. I'm right. Okay. So very simple. Let me get through some of the stuff I cover on my. But this canopy above the atmosphere would do several things. Today's air is about 60 miles thick or over the earth. If you squeezed it down to maybe 10 miles, put a ball over the top. I used to have a glass ball here somewhere, but like the snow globe they shake. If you increase the air pressure, maybe just 5 or 10%, and increase the oxygen concentration, the air bubbles they find in amber are 32% oxygen. The air we're breathing right now is 21%. Well, if we were breathing 32% oxygen under slightly higher pressure, just breathing would be exciting. And you would live much longer, be much healthier, and you could run for hundreds of miles, never get tired. Things were very different in that pre-flood world. All that was destroyed. Today, we have an atmosphere that stretched out about 50 or 60 miles. But if you go up a couple different places in there, you have what's called a heat sink where it gets really cold, like 100 below zero. So the ice canopy theory is that there was ice above the atmosphere, blocking out UV light, making them live a long time. A couple inches of ice would block out ultraviolet light. X-rays would be from the sun, which is some of those things damage your skin. It could have been held up like an inflatable building roof is. Just simple air pressure would hold it up. They make some ginormous inflatable buildings. You only need just a little bit of increase, in 5 or 10% increase to hold the roof up. A cubic foot of inch of ice weighs about 5 pounds per square foot. So just increasing the air pressure a little bit from 14.7 to 14.707 would hold up a couple inches of ice like a big inflatable building. Or maybe the magnetic field held it up. We cover all this on our video number 2. But I want to tell you what the Garden of Eden was like in Hovind theory. The creationists, yeah, there we go. Thank you, man. Thank you, sir. The Christians have always taught that there was something above the firmament. This is Josephus about the time of Christ. He said when God made the earth, it's crystal globe here, snow globe. It says he set the heaven above the universe, surrounding it with ice. The Jews have taught he placed a crystalline firmament around it, and it was 3 fingers thick, so a couple inches. This guy said the thickness of the firmament is 2 fingers. Well, I'm sure they argued about that and started the church of the 2 fingers and the church of the 3 fingers. You know, Jews argue about everything. So it doesn't matter. There was a thin layer of ice up there, a couple inches thick, a flat and solid surface. You can watch my video number 2 to get much more on this. But I think what this would do, there was also water under the crust of the earth. Today, most of the earth is uninhabitable. 70% of the earth is underwater. Oh, get my globe here. 70% of the earth is underwater. A lot of the rest of it is ice caps or deserts or uninhabitable. About 3% of the surface of the earth is habitable for mankind. The Bible says when he first made the earth, he established it upon the floods. The water that's now on the surface was in the crust of the earth. Psalm 33, he layeth up the depth in storehouses. He stretched out the earth above the water, Psalm 136. So I think the Garden of Eden conditions that Adam and Eve lived under would be a crystalline canopy above, couple inches, maybe 10 miles up, layer of air to breathe that was richer in oxygen and slightly greater pressure, then a crust of the earth to stand on, maybe 8 or 10 miles, and then water under the crust of the earth. It was the water under the crust that came shooting to the surface when the fountains of the deep broke open. So most of the flood water came from inside the earth. It didn't come from rain. The water shooting out the earth still today has cracks all over the place. Fault lines are called. And so I think that's where the water came shooting out. And and as it shoots out, the crack would get wider from simple friction and erosion. And so 10 miles of rock on top of the water would put nearly 60,000 pounds per square inch. So that would probably launch rocks out into space. You have to reach escape velocity and launch them out. We may still be hitting stuff that was launched off the earth from the flood, rocks flying around through space. It's interesting, the moon has 2 different sides to it, from the side we see and the side we can't see. But the spaceships go back there and say, wow, the far side of the moon is very different. Lots of smaller craters. Well, I think the near side was blasted straight from the fountains of the deep breaking open, and the other side was small stuff being drawn in by moon's gravity, which is pretty weak. So the smaller stuff would come in and make a smaller hole. Anyway, there are craters all over the earth now. I don't think it was that way in the Garden of Eden. It was a perfect world. And so we cover all this in video number 2, about the wrinkled mountains and all that stuff. Let me get up to where I need to go. I got so much material here. So I think what the Bible says, the scoffers in the last days would be willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood. The 2 main events and the coming judgment. And 2 Peter chapter 3 talks about that. But the scoffers are ignorant. What was that creation like? When God first made the earth, it was very different. Let me get up to right here. It had this canopy overhead that would increase air pressure, give them richer oxygen. I think the earth was probably not tilted over 23.5 degrees. It was the same all the time. 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness. And they find dinosaur bones at the South Pole. Well, reptiles couldn't live down there now. We got a 100-pound tortoise here at our Dinosaur Adventureland. When it gets below about 40, 50 degrees, he goes in his house where the heat lamp is. They don't want it to be cold. They want to stay warm. They can't maintain their body heat. But fossils of dinosaurs are found at the South Pole. Well, that's because they think it was nice and warm at one time. They got a new theory that maybe a lack of oxygen killed the dinosaurs. Oxygen deprivation caused dinosaur extinction. Oh, yeah, they died from no oxygen, right? They've discovered they have small nostrils and small lungs. 80-foot Apatosaurus, this article said, had nostrils the same size as a horse. Well, how's an 80-foot animal going to get enough air through nostrils the size of a horse's nostrils? He couldn't today. But dinosaurs lived. We find the bones of them all over the world. The giant Spinosaurus, 50 feet long, with little tiny nostrils. How did he breathe? 33-foot dinosaur fossil found in the Sahara Desert. When they drill down to get oil, which they do all over the world, they find all kinds of fossils all over the world. Fossils are found. Even human graveyards found in the Sahara. The Sahara used to be a beautiful place to live. I think it got destroyed by the flood, and then later just simply the climate change made things dry out. So we cover a lot of material. The amber air bubbles found in amber. Maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park. And by the way, if I'm going too long, just stop me, brother. I can go for hours on this. Just say, okay, Hovind, next guy's turn. Air bubbles found in amber, which is petrified tree sap or hardened tree sap, oftentimes have 32% oxygen. Now, wait a minute. 50% more oxygen than it does today, this article says from Time magazine. Fossil, they found it had 32% oxygen. Today, we're breathing 21. I believe those air bubbles in amber were from the samples of the air from before the flood. During the flood, the trees would get busted up all over the place, and the sap would ooze out, and they would trap samples of pre-flood atmosphere. So that's probably what they're breathing. The only trend is they had far more oxygen than we imagine. So if you lived in a world with more oxygen, more air pressure, and could live to be 900, like the Bible says, the reptiles would get to be ginormous. This guy said 80 million years ago, it was 50% richer in oxygen than today. Interesting. It wasn't 80 million years ago. Analysis of the gas of these bubbles show that it was 35% oxygen compared to 21%. Geology.com. Oh. See, under double atmospheric pressure, not only does your hemoglobin take on oxygen, your plasma in your blood will get oxygen saturated, which means you could literally run for hundreds of miles. You wouldn't get tired. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy. They're using it at hospitals all over the place. High pressure oxygen. We've got a small hyperbaric chamber here where you get in there. Our zipper's broken right now, but you can get in there and zip it up to and get 1.5% atmosphere, 1.5 atmospheres, and breathe pure oxygen. And after an hour in there, you feel like getting out and going jogging. It's amazing what hyperbaric therapy does. Jessica fell down in the well in Texas back in '87. She was, 2 years old? She was down there for 2.5 days. It took a miracle to get her out of there. When they finally got her out, they were going to cut off her right leg because it was totally black from lack of circulation. One doctor said, hey, put her in a hyperbaric chamber. Let's try it. They put her in a hyperbaric chamber and her right leg was saved. They had to amputate half of her little toe instead of her whole right leg. There she is a year later at the White House. So there's plenty on the internet about hyperbaric chambers. I think the whole earth was hyperbaric. West Germany sends all stroke patients for hyperbaric treatment, get great recovery results from strokes. In England, they treat multiple sclerosis. In France, they treat arthritis and all kinds of diseases from hyperbaric chambers, high pressure oxygen. Sweden is treating gangrene. India treats leprosy with hyperbaric chambers. So on my video number 2 of my series, you can get the whole thing for $50, drdino.com, 855-BIG-DINO, extension 1. So I want to get a set of those tapes. If you get 2 sets, you get a third one free to give one away to somebody, $50 a set. So they're treating autism, neurological disorders. Hyperbaric therapy is growing all over the world. It works for just about everything. Well, now, what if the whole world was hyperbaric? All these pro teams have a hyperbaric chamber because healing time is twice as fast. They heal faster. Get them back out there playing with the ball. NFL athletes use hyperbaric chamber to accelerate healing. Some people have their own private chamber. They're expensive, but hey, if you make a bunch of money playing with the ball, go buy your own chamber. So these guys, the minor accidents are treated. There's a giant one, holds 30 people at a time, big hyperbaric chamber. This is similar to what we have, a hyperbaric sleeping bag. My son and his wife and I went to an oxygen bar in Alaska where you pay $5 while you're eating and breathe pure oxygen. And you feel like going shopping again. It's a conspiracy, I can tell you that right now. A friend of mine put me in his hyperbaric chamber in Oregon. He said, you want to try it, Brother Hovind? I said, yeah. After an hour in there under double atmospheric pressure, I felt like going jogging. It was amazing, just simple, increasing oxygen. So I cover in my video series, I think the Garden of Eden conditions were very different. They were protected from most of the harmful effects of the sun, had increased air pressure. Plants would grow like crazy. Dr. Kimori at the University in Japan started raising his tomato plants in his basement, and all he had to get light to the plants was fiber optic cable coming off the roof. He was in a basement apartment with no windows. The fiber optic cable, he did not realize at the beginning, was stripping out the harmful effects of the light and showering the plants with pure light. You can get the website himawari-net.co.jp to read all about his experiments. His tomato plants grew 40 feet tall and produced 15,000 tomatoes. One tomato plant. I think the whole earth was like that before the flood because they find fossils of enormous plants. Ginormous plant fossils, insect, dragonfly, 50-inch wingspan have been found. They couldn't fly today. The air is too thin. And so, and I go into about the surface area to volume ratio problem you get as an insect grows. It doesn't have enough skin to feed the body mass that it has. So I think there's overwhelming evidence because of the giant fossils of giant insects that the Earth had greater air pressure. It had to, or they couldn't have lived. They couldn't have breathed. Let's see. Here's a guy added CO2. Just by adding more carbon dioxide, his plant was 4.5 times bigger, just with CO2. Today, the air is 0.06% CO2. I think it was more like maybe 1% CO2, which would make plants grow like crazy. Any farmer, anybody that studies botany can tell you, oh yeah, you give more plants more CO2, they're going to grow faster. You can Google it. Rice and CO2 has greened planet Earth. Giant vegetables come off of these things. So what happens, the stomata under the leaf will open up and let more, they get actually more stomata per square inch. And this guy did, his corn stalks grew twice as tall. Maple, or a black walnut tree, twice as tall. Cantaloupe as big as soccer balls. There was an article 30 years ago in Creation magazine about all this with pressure. What would happen if the plants were given what we think would be the pre-flood Garden of Eden conditions? California State Science Fair project. What do they do? Plant growth, manipulation of atmospheric pressure growth systems. By adding pressure or changing the light or adding CO2, plants go nuts. They would like to grow lots faster. And judging from, I did a debate with a woman professor from Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, and she said there's so much coal in the world, it had to take millions of years to form all that coal. Because she said all the plants in the world today could not be squeezed into that amount of coal. There's not enough plants in the world to make the coal in the ground. I said, you're right. She said, don't you see? It took millions of years. I said, no, don't you see? The pre-flood world was very different. They had a lot more plants. 70% of our world is still underwater. What if all that was raising plants? What if the North and South Pole were covered in plants? See, the scoffers in the last days, 2 Peter said, 2 Peter 3, they're willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood. What was that creation like? Fossil trees that approach the heights of the tallest redwoods today have been found in northern Thailand. A petrified log, 237 feet long. One petrified log. Petrified fern fossils that are ginormous by today's standards. I know that's not a word. I made it up and I'm going to use it, okay? I think the canopy above the Earth would increase air pressure and had probably more CO2 and more oxygen. Today, the nitrogen just dilutes it down, 78% nitrogen, so we're not, dying of oxygen toxicity. If it was 100% oxygen, we couldn't live very long. So I think 32% is about optimal. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff I cover in the Garden of Eden in my seminar, part 2. You can get the whole hour and a half in the whole series, $50, 18 hours if you want that. So did I go too long there, brother? Sorry about that. You go ahead and ask questions.
No, that was awesome. I just had a quick question. What happened to the canopy? Was it when it broke apart during the flood? And what happened to it?
Well, I cover this in great detail on my YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official, a couple of weeks ago. If the fountains of the deep broke open, like the Bible says, and stuff went shooting up, it would shatter this crystalline canopy, and super cold ice is magnetic. So the Earth has a magnetic field around it. The ice then would be dumped on the poles. I think there was a rapid ice age by the ice just being super cold snow from the shattered canopy being dumped on the poles. They find they find frozen mammoths standing up, frozen, with food still in their teeth. They didn't even have a chance to swallow their last bite. Undigested food in their stomach, and they're frozen solid. When I was doing research on this for my seminar, I said, I wonder how long would it take to freeze an elephant? So I called Bird's Eye Frozen Food people in New York. And I said, if I stuck an elephant in the freezer, what would happen? It was silent on the other end of the line for a minute. I'm sure they're thinking. Anyway, the guy said, well, you would have a crowded freezer. I said, yes, sir. I'm well aware of that. But how long would it take to freeze an elephant? He said, about 5 days. I said, why? He said, well, the outside would freeze and the heat would be trapped in the middle. It would take a long time to freeze to the middle. I said, well, I've got to freeze my elephant in less than 5 hours. How do I do it? They said, well, you got to cut them up in little pieces. You know, if you ever thaw out or freeze a large turkey or something for Thanksgiving, it takes about 24 hours to freeze or thaw 12 inches. So how do you, the food in their stomach is still undigested. I mean, after an animal dies, the stomach acid doesn't know he's dead. It keeps doing its job of dissolving the food. So how do you find a mammoth frozen, standing up with undigested, fresh green food in their stomach? You got to freeze them in less than 5 hours. And so the guy said, well, if you want to freeze your elephant less than 5 hours and you can't cut them up, then you got to put them in something like liquid nitrogen, 300 below zero. Well, it never gets 300 below zero on Earth. The coldest temperature ever recorded at the South Pole was somewhere around 127 below. That's pretty chilly, but that's not cold enough to freeze the mammoth. So what happened? I think the crystalline canopy above, when it got shattered by the fountains of the deep breaking open, would snow on the poles and it'd be a rapid dump of tiny ice crystals that would freeze things standing up, including trees frozen standing up. So that's the Hovind theory. The ice from the crystalline canopy is probably still here, North and South Pole.
Nice. What are the biggest objections when it comes to the canopy theory when you debate against it?
Well, it makes too much sense. I've never heard them give an the biggest objection they have is, well, other scientists don't believe that.
Oh,
okay. Tell them to come see me. I'll straighten them out.
So I'll jump in here. I've got a ton of questions from the audience, and a lot of them having to do with Noah's Ark and the global flood. I've got a couple random ones here on the canopy. So I think before I move to questions specifically on like Noah's Ark, let me see. The chat's lively. They're flying by. So let me go back here. Here's one question that came in, Dr. Hovind, from Luca. He says, if the sun was above the ice, why was it not melting? Is that a question that makes sense, Dr. Hovind?
Oh, yeah, perfect sense. Is the sun above the ice in Alaska right now? Sure. I've grown up in the north in Illinois and been all over the world. And I was in New Hampshire for a year and a half, and it's cold, Berlin, New Hampshire. And you can have sunny days and it doesn't melt the ice. I think there's people all over the world will attest the fact that there are sunny days in frozen places. Siberia gets plenty of sunlight, but it stays awfully cold up there. So, yeah, I think just any earth science book would give you how weather works, would explain that. You know, it's a matter of the angle of the sun hitting the atmosphere. And there's a lot of factors tie into that. But if you get enough ice in one spot, it becomes its own refrigerator. It keeps itself cold. You can get a 100-pound block of ice, set it out on the sidewalk when it's 100 degrees. It'll take probably a couple days to melt. It'll take a long time.
Right. That's a great answer, Dr. Hovind. I do have a question here, but I don't want to dominate. Brother George, did you have anything you wanted to say before we moved on to a follow-up question?
Well, yeah. Look, we've heard some of these questions from critics before, but one that keeps coming up is when Noah sacrificed the animals after the flood, did he wipe out an entire species?
Well, that's a simple misunderstanding of what the Bible says. God told Noah to take 2 of each kind and 7 of some. So he took 7 of some of the animals, and those were the ones he sacrificed. So no, he didn't wipe out a whole species. They should read the Bible before they criticize it.
Right. I find a lot of these arguments and criticisms are coming from critics who've never actually read the Bible or the Genesis account in the first place. So they're oftentimes based on a false assumption. So that's a great answer, Kent. My specific question has to do with a common argument I hear from the critics. They'll state that, and I'm sure you've heard it numerous times as well, Kent. They'll say that Noah's Ark could not have been possible because there would be no way Noah and his family could store so much food and so much water for all of those animals. In your opinion, Kent, do you think that's a valid objection? And also, what's the best way to refute that claim?
Well, there's all kinds of things to consider in that. God told Noah how big to build the ark. There were probably about 8,000 different kinds of animals. He didn't have to bring fish on the ark. They had plenty of water outside, okay? He didn't have to bring insects because insects don't have nostrils. God told Noah to bring all those in whose nostrils was the breath of life. Some insects might have been on the ark, but insects can survive a flood just fine on floating log mats and dead carcasses, so that would not be a problem. And he didn't have to bring any water. The whole earth was fresh water. I believe Noah's Ark probably had a moon pool, a hole in the middle. Some big ships do that today. You get a really long ship, when it goes over the wave, it'll tend to bend or stress the ship and eventually break. So if you put a hole in the middle of the floor of the ship and build walls up inside, as you crest over the waves, the water goes up and down inside that, and actually does several things. It relieves the stress on a long ship by having several moon pools. It also pumps air in and out of the boat. Every time you hit a wave, it's like a big piston going up, pumping air in, and it's a source of fresh water. So I think the water is certainly a ridiculous argument. That would not be a problem. We know that the oceans are getting saltier every day. They gain salt all the time. Mineral salts wash off the ground. Evaporation takes out only the water, leaving the salt behind. I think anybody can do a study real quickly and find out today's 3.6% salt in the ocean could have come in 4,000 or 5,000 years very easily from a completely freshwater ocean. So I think Noah didn't have to bring any water. As far as food, many animals, when they become confined, become dormant. They're not eating near as much because they're not running around as much. They're more dormant. God didn't tell them to put cages in the ark. They put rooms and probably had big piles of food because all the animals were vegetarian, according to Genesis chapter 1 and 2. It wasn't until after the flood, Genesis 9, that people became carnivorous. He said, now Noah, you can eat meat. And he said, all the animals are going to be afraid of you. So before the flood came and during the flood, they were all vegetarian. They all could have eaten any kind of fruit or vegetables. And with the pre-flood conditions, the increased air pressure, probably there'd be no spoilage. It'd be very different without the UV light and the things that we have today that cause damage, make the food spoil more quickly. So 8,000 animals that are mostly dormant. Some sleep the whole time. If they can't run around, they go to sleep. Less activity. Plus, Noah probably brought babies of everything. They would, of course, eat a lot less. And that's just common sense to bring babies, Why wouldn't you bring babies? They're going to live longer after the flood, and that's why you're bringing them. You wouldn't bring an adult baby of anything.
And babies sleep a lot.
And what now?
And babies sleep a lot.
They sleep. A lot of animals sleep when they're confined. I'd like to sleep a lot once in a while. I don't get a chance to, but babies sleep a lot. Yeah, young ones.
Well, that's why I'd love to get one of those hyperbaric oxygen chambers you were talking about, Dr. Hovind. I could sleep for 5 minutes a night, and I could do everything that I do now plus more. Here's a more lighthearted question. Came in through a super chat. Doki Doki Bible Club. Thank you so much. Question is, warm in Alabama? ?
Well, it was 65 today. That's a little chilly, but no, it's beautiful. We love it down here. Come on down.
Is Alabama the 3% or the 97%?
The what now?
Is Alabama the 3% or the 97%?
Of what?
Inhabitable.
Oh, Alabama is definitely the habitable part. Yeah, we love it down here. We don't need any more people, though. There's plenty. We got 35 in our town. That's enough.
Well, we're definitely going to come visit soon one of these days.
Yeah,
Rob, did you have a question, brother?
Yeah, just real quick. I still don't understand why people would have thought Noah would have brought adult old animals on the ark anyway. I mean, he would have brought something that would needed to breed and repopulate the earth, right? I mean, why would he bring elderly animals that are all old? But one of the most popular, powerful arguments against the global flood being just 4,500 years ago is the genetic bottleneck. They say that humans and other animals would have never been able to rebound so quickly. What would you say to that?
You talk about a genetic bottleneck. They believe everything came from one amoeba. Don't they?
That's right.
That came from a rock. What is the genetic bottleneck of a rock, which came from a dot of nothing exploding? What's a genetic bottleneck of nothing? It is so insane that they would pick at something like that. I think that any farmer would take. Matter of fact, I was speaking on this one time at I forget what state I was in even, but I mentioned about there are 450 breeds of dogs in the world today, and they might have come from a common ancestor called a dog. And this lady raised her hand in the Q&A time. She said, Brother Hovind, our family has been in the kennel business for 100 years. My great-grandfather started a kennel. We raise and breed special varieties of dogs. She said, I can tell you from experience, we could make every breed of dog in the world today in 100 years. You give us 50 generic dogs, go pick up 50 dogs on the street, give us anything. We will selectively breed, and in 100 years, we'll have a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. In 100 years. So most of the dogs today have been created by selective breeding. Somebody wants a cute little lap dog like a Chihuahua. Those dogs wouldn't last 2 minutes out in the woods on their own. And most of the dogs they do create with this selective breeding, you got to babysit them now. They could never go out and find their own food. They'll die if they have to do that. So I think that same with the cows. When I was in Illinois, at Kankakee, I was teaching up there. Took my kids because somebody in Illinois that year at Kankakee had the world's record milk producing cow. That one cow produced 100 pounds of milk a day. Utterly ridiculous. So we went to see the world record cow, 100 pounds of milk. The thing could barely walk. Okay. It could never survive in the wild. So man selectively breeds animals to get a particular trait that they like. They want more beef or more milk or, something. But in nature, they would be weeded out. So today there are 37 varieties of foxes in the world. They might have had a common ancestor called a fox. And there are 1,100 species of bats in the world, and they might have had a common ancestor called a bat. All we ever see is exactly what God said would happen. 20 times in the first 7 chapters, it says the animals are going to bring forth after their kind. And a Chihuahua and a Great Dane and a wolf are the same kind of animal. Then the dog family. Atheists will look at that and say, well, maybe there's no limit to this. Well, you can believe that if you want, but science shows us there's a limit. They've been trying to get smaller dogs for a long time. You think they'll ever get a dog as small as a hamster? There are animals as small as a hamster, like a hamster. You think they'll ever get a dog as big as an elephant? There are animals as big as an elephant too, like an elephant. So sure, we can get variations of dogs, but there are limits. And the further you get away from the normal, generic, ordinary dog, the more problems you're going to have. Most of the special breed dogs have some kind of problem like hip dysplasia or heart problems or something. They don't live as long. Or you got to babysit them. They couldn't survive for sure in the wild. Okay?
Yeah, no, I love it, Dr. Hovind. These arguments from the critics are prime examples of 2 Peter 3 and the scoffers, right? They use arguments from bottlenecks in this specific case when they themselves believe all life today, as you said, came from a single-celled like ancestor long ago and far away, which came from a rock, which ultimately came from nothing. So, yeah, perfect.
That's a bottleneck.
That's a bottleneck right there. George, if you had a question.
Because I live in Australia, I get to see some variety of plants and whatever, and there's one species of bottle brush, I think it is. The seed is so hard that it has to wait for a fire to come along for it to germinate. I mean, we've heard a lot of stories from the evolutionists about what happened to the plants during or after the global flood.
Well, Noah did not have to bring plants on the ark other than for food. And of course, whatever the animals ate, they're going to deposit in their feces when they leave. And their seeds, many seeds grow after, out of the animal feces. They don't get affected by digestion. Plus, during a flood, you get floating log mats all over the place. Put my slides back up there, would you, Steve? Here's an example of coal seams. Coal, obviously made from plants. They can make coal in the laboratory in 20 minutes. You take wood under heat and pressure, turn it to coal in 20 minutes. So why would you have layer coal, layer of sediment, layer of coal, sediment, coal, sediment, coal? Well, during the flood, you get the tide going up and down. Only with no interruptions, the tide would probably be a 200-foot tidal change. Harmonic tide, they call that, if the earth were covered in water and not interrupted by continents. And the water going up and down would have to be coming up. They estimate that a harmonic tide on the earth would be about a 200-foot tidal change. Okay, well, if the water came up 200 feet here in Lenox, Alabama, where's all the water coming from to fill that bump? Sideways. It's being pulled sideways by the moon's gravity at the same speed the earth is turning. We're in Lenox, we're 31 degrees above the equator. We're turning almost 900 miles an hour toward the east. So to keep that bump of water full under the moon, the water's racing at 900 miles an hour, sideways. That's going to knock down the forests and make layers of trees. So the floating log mats would be ginormous all over the world, and insects can survive just fine on floating log mats. And many plants can survive prolonged inundation and grow right back. Some actually require some period of inundation to germinate. So I think you'll go to any flood area any place where there's been a flood, man, the next year the plants are growing like crazy because it's all fresh topsoil on top. So I think the seeds in the animal food, the seeds that floated, seeds can float for a long time and germinate when they land. Seeds that are buried, floating log mats would germinate. Look what happened to Mount St. Helens. And all over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, running through these layers. There's one harmonic tide, 200 feet, have to come up 200 feet in 6 hours, 12 and a half minutes, each tide. Each tide would make new layers. And so the floating log mats would be one simple answer for the seeds. But again, an atheist will pick on something like that little question, which they think is like an insurmountable question, and it's not. And yet they turn around, talk about swallowing and straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel. They then believe all the plants in the world came from a dot of nothing exploding. That is a special kind of stupid that needs special care.
Well, go ahead, George. Go ahead.
I was just going to, we've heard a lot of explanations to the Polystrate fossils. There's one example that I can think about. In Nova Scotia, I believe there are Polystrate fossils of reeds, giant reeds. Now, how do they explain the Polystrate fossils where the actual fossil is a reed? They tell you that
reeds are tender. Yeah. They wouldn't last long. They have to be buried quickly before it had a chance to decay. Reeds wouldn't last long at all. Yeah.
Exactly. And because I live in a very, well, it's considered the driest continent in the world, Australia. How do you explain the existence of deserts in the context of the global flood?
Well, the deserts formed after the flood. If you watch my video number 1, where I talk about the age of the Earth, I show the Sahara Desert. All the articles are saying the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old because it's growing. It's a process called desertification. The Sahara Desert is growing. It's 1,300 miles north to south. And at the rate it's growing, compared to the size of the desert, they say, wow, it's about 4,000 years old. I would agree. When Noah got off the ark, the whole world had been covered in water. Stuff began to grow, but because of what's called the prevailing wind patterns, things that happen because of the Coriolis effect of the Earth and the prevailing wind patterns at different latitudes and things, you get some areas where the wind always blows the same way. Here in Lenox, Alabama, it generally comes out of the southwest. Okay, you probably have a prevailing wind pattern where you are too, and the Coriolis effect. So I think the deserts would begin to form after the flood, and that's why the biggest desert in the world. I can call up the data on it here. Let's see. Alt F open, seminar part 1. Here we go. The deserts would begin to grow after the floodwater went down. So I asked the atheists, I say, guys, if the Earth is billions of years old, why don't we have a desert that's older than 4,000? Because the flood was 4,400 years ago, according to the Bible. Let's see if I can find it here. Anyway, go ahead. Next question. I'll try to find the slide proving what I just said.
That's a good point right there. Actually, before I get to the next question, based on some of the things you were talking about, especially the lines of evidence with the flood, I noticed that the scoffers on their own channels, when they're with their own atheist pals, they'll scoff. One debate that comes to mind, Dr. Hovind, is Professor Dave. I believe you forced him into early retirement. He'll never recover from that. And he attempted to go at it with you on the flood. And within 10 minutes, you were providing evidence after evidence, and he wanted to get off that subject so fast. I was laughing in my seat. So I wanted to point out that, when you get them into a live debate, suddenly they're not so confident, are they, Dr. Hovind?
Well, he still thinks he won that debate. I am baffled. He apparently didn't watch it himself. Okay, he still will brag. Oh, how bad he slaughtered Hovind. Well, Dave, bring it on anytime. I'll take you and all. I'll challenge all the atheists you can get together in one room at the same time. If I get half the time, we talk about one topic at a time and no interrupting. shut their mic off when it's my turn to talk. They can shut mine off when it's their turn to talk. I want them to present the best 3 evidences they know of for evolution. And by that, I mean macroevolution. They'll give examples of, 3 different colors of squirrels coming from a common ancestor. Okay, it's still a squirrel, guys, okay, a squirrel. It doesn't prove mosquitoes are related to whales. So all they do is give examples of what anybody would call variations or microevolution. It's still the same kind of animal. God said 10 times in the creation story, they would bring forth after their kind. And then they'll try to divert the topic and say, well, what exactly is a kind? And I say, well, can you define exactly what's a species? Are dogs and wolves different species? Yeah. Can they interbreed? Yeah. So exactly what's a species? It doesn't matter. A 4-year-old can tell you a dog and a wolf are the same kind and do not belong in the duck family.
I should get to a couple of these super chats real quick because everybody's enjoying this. We got a great audience today. A lot of people throwing questions. So a couple of super chats here. Here's a specific one from SOD, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Right here seems to be an evolutionist argument. He says after their kind is just charitably the law of monophily, which, as we know, is they'll say, R and Ra will say that we can't outgrow our ancestry. He says it does not disprove evolution. And Dr. Hovind, you're quite familiar with this argument where, you'll point out dogs produce dogs and they'll say that's what evolution expects. But then you'll ask them, do you believe a dog came from something non-dog long ago and far away? And that's where they point out, well, that was millions of years ago. How do you respond to that, Dr. Hovind?
Well, if we can't outgrow our ancestors, but we all came from a single-celled amoeba, did the amoeba outgrow into something else? Apparently, we did outgrow our ancestors because we have more than one cell.
Right.
Don't they teach we all came from a single-celled creature? An average human has 100 trillion cells in their body. I think we outgrew our ancestors.
And Kent, they all point to this last universal common ancestor, but they can never tell you what it is. But it supposedly gave rise to the archaea, the bacteria, and the eukaryote. Well, those 3 domains of life are 3 different clades. So that defeats the phylogenetic tree in itself.
Well, what they do in the textbooks for the kids, they put humans, monkeys, all the different animals and plants, and they draw lines between all of them. Well, the fact that they drew a line that's enough evidence for them. Hey, we got a line, that proves it. I could draw a line between a human and a car. Would that prove they're related? No. All they do, it's pure propaganda is what it is. And to me, it's absolutely insane to believe that nobody's ever observed a dog produce a non-dog. Never. And so guys like Aaron Nelson, who calls himself Aaron Ra, the sun god, I say to be a son, you'd have to be, bright. But anyway, sure doesn't qualify for that. But and I won't debate him publicly together because he'll interrupt all the time unless I got control of his, somebody has control of his microphone. But if he won't interrupt, sure, I'll take him on again. So we can't outgrow our ancestors. That's all evolution teaches, is that everybody did outgrow their ancestors. It's completely bizarre, insane, I think. They need a psychiatric evaluation.
That's good. Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Dr. Hovind. Here's another super chat that came in. Doki Doki Bible Club, thank you so much, $5. Doki says, Hugh Ross, who you've debated before, Kent, says nature is an extra book of the Bible and imagines evolutionary story. Why so many Christians share this view, in your opinion? I guess referring to Hugh Ross's view. Day Age, I believe it is.
Yeah, Hugh Ross is a Catholic who believes that the earth is billions of years old and we have to somehow make the Bible say evolution. Well, the Bible says very clearly nothing died until Adam sinned. Man brought death into the world. Evolution says, oh no, death brought man into the world. Billions of years of death and suffering and struggle for life, and finally we made it, we're here. Total opposite to what the Bible says. God made a perfect world, man wrecked it. And death and suffering are here because of man's sin. Whereas in Hugh Ross's view, death and suffering and struggle for life is how we got here. It's a wonderful thing. that everybody dies. I mean, in evolution theory, you got a whole bunch of animals. Let's take a herd of cows, okay? One cow evolves a little better than the rest for some reason. Some genetic mistake or something happens. This cow is now a super cow. What has to happen to the rest of them? Well, for this to work, they all got to die so the super cow can now take over the world. But of course, if you get one cow evolving a little better than the rest, you really have to have two, male and female, in the same time in history at the same place. And they got to find each other. So they got a whole lot of problems. But they do strongly teach that animals do somehow change to something else. It's just simply never observed. It's not science. That's why I've said for years, evolution is a religion, nothing more than a religion. And if they want to believe it, that's fine. I don't care what they believe. But they want to make all of us pay to have their religion taught in the schools. Now that we got a problem with. If they want to go start a private school and teach the kids you all come from a rock, okay, go teach it. They can even have their own theme songs, Rock of Ages, if they want. But they shouldn't have taxpayers pay for that dumb religion to be taught.
What do you think about the flood and the Caribbean islands? Does the flood explain their existence, or do you know if in that model?
Well, here's the Hovind theory on that. All over the world, almost all of the continents that we see and the islands have continental shelf. There's a beach. You can walk out quite a ways, and all of a sudden it drops off into the deep part. Off of Florida, you can, Florida, you can go out about 300 miles and before it gets 100 feet deep. And then all of a sudden it drops off into what's called the abyss. The oceans have two distinct parts, the depth, the deep part, and the continental shelf. Right now, if you lowered the oceans 100 feet, and they average 12,000 feet deep, if you could lower the oceans 100 feet, you could walk anywhere in the world. The land bridge between Alaska and Russia, most of that water in there is only 60 feet deep. And, it's 60 miles wide, but only 60 feet deep. The English Channel between England and France, it's only about 100 feet deep. From here to the shop, 100 feet. That's it. So I think right after the flood, when Noah got off the ark, the ice caps were bigger, making the oceans smaller. It would take a few hundred years for that ice to melt back, which as the ice melts back, it's going to raise the ocean level, like duh. So I think the Caribbean islands were probably part of the mainland of the United States, or maybe South America. I'm not sure where they would fit in if you lowered down to the continental shelf. Go to Google Maps and get the satellite view. You can see the shallow water around England for 100 miles off the coast. You can still see it from the satellite. The depth, it's not that deep. So the Caribbean would be probably part of South America. I think as the ice melted back, the Atlantic Ocean would fill in and then finally spill over and fill up the Gulf of Mexico, maybe 50 years after the flood. There's no question there's ice came all the way down to Kansas City, Missouri. I mean, there was an ice age, but I think it happened simultaneous with the flood. I covered that a couple of weeks ago on our channel, Kent Hovind Official. If you want to go there and watch that with all my slides and stuff, I got about 20,000 slides. So it take me a while to find them. So I won't get them now for the program. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that response, Kent. That was a really good response. I've got a question here that can sum up probably about 20 different questions that came in. So I'll sum it up with this one question. Kent, with the critics of young Earth creationists, they'll often say that the fossil record is a reflection of large-scale evolution from more simple organisms to what we have today. In other words, the critics say the global flood itself could not explain the ordering of the fossil record, right? They say the global flood should have mixed everything up, essentially. What is the best way to address this claim, Dr. Hovind?
Well, first place, young Earth, 6,000 is not young. That's a long time. It's hard to think about Abe Lincoln, 150 years ago, or Columbus 500 years ago. 6,000 is a long time. So that's plenty of time to account for everything, especially when you consider the flood. As far as the fossil record, I say there's no such thing as a fossil record. No such thing. There are fossils. We got thousands of them here in Dinosaur Adventureland. When you find a fossil like this petrified clam, you should notice a couple things about it right away. Number one, it does not talk. Number two, it does not have a date stamped on it. It doesn't say made by a clam in 80 million BC. Doesn't say that. So somebody's putting their interpretation on the clam. It's also interesting, there are millions of petrified clams in the closed position. Whoa, whoa, whoa. When clams die, they open. How do you get petrified clams closed on top of Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world? So there's no such thing as a fossil record. It doesn't exist. As far as the order of the fossils, it is generally true that reptiles are found in the same layer. Not always. Generally. What does that mean? Could it mean that reptiles have a similar body density? And of course, in a flood, they're going to float in the same layer. They say clams are usually found at the bottom of the geologic column. Okay. They'll say, see, that proves clams evolved first. I say, no, guys, clams are already at the bottom when the flood starts. That's where they live. They're the first ones buried. They say, well, birds are found last on the top layer. That proves they evolved last. No, birds are the last ones buried in the flood. They fly around till they run out of gas. And they got hollow feathers and hollow bones. Of course they're found on top. Of course they're found in the same layer. You know, clams might be found at the bottom because they're already at the bottom. That's where they live. They're the first ones buried. Maybe because they're not too smart. They see things changing around them. They clam up and hope things get better. Okay. Maybe because their body density. You know, clams are a little heavier than birds, pound, per square inch density. Maybe because they can't run quite as fast as a bird can fly. I don't know. But the sorting of the fossils is not as clear as they would like you to believe it is. All kinds of anomalies happen. And if you find a bird in what they consider the wrong layer, they've got 20 different excuses they can turn to in their book of how this happened. It was an insertion. There was a crack, a fault line, and it fell down in. They got a whole bunch of exceptions to that. If you watch, there's a video. It's fabulous, but it's kind of boring speaker. I feel bad about that. It's called Experiments in Stratification. At the Navy, at the laboratory in Colorado, they dump sediments into this tank that's like 30 feet long while the water's flowing. As they pour the sediments in, it forms 8 or 10 layers at the same time. The layers form horizontally, not vertically. If the layers are forming horizontally, you can have a fossil on top that's actually older than a fossil at the bottom that was deposited earlier. Watch the video, Experiments in Stratification, if you can tolerate the, come on, speed it up, guys, But it's really good material. Just needs to be we're going to build a flume tank like that here at Dinosaur Adventureland, where we can show that the layers do not form. They tell the kids in school the top layer is younger. I say, really? Where did it come from? Outer space? What do you mean the layer is younger? No, all the layers are the same age. Get a jar of dirt, sand, rocks, gravel. We do this here a couple times a day when we give the tour, and water, and we shake it up and set it down. And in 2 minutes, it settles into gravel, sand, clay. Always gravel, sand, clay. Okay. Noah's flood, each tide would make gravel, sand, clay. Our gravel pit, I'm in the middle of a gravel pit, Lennox. That's what it was for years before it became Dinosaur Adventureland, a gravel pit. Perfect. It has 7 layers of gravel, sand, clay, gravel, sand, clay. The layers we have here go all the way to North Carolina, all the way to North Tennessee, and all the way to South Florida. This was a huge gravel, seams of gravel. And the gravel all over the world is rounded. Well, now hold it. They call it river rock. Oh, no, this is flood rock. This was tumbled around during Noah's flood. If the water came up 200 feet in Lennox and came rushing in at 900 miles an hour, every tidal change, it would roll the rocks back and forth and round them off. This is from the flood. So there is no fossil record. There are lots of fossils, but each tide would make a different set of layers. And so Noah was in the ark floating for 880 tidal changes. Then the ark hit bottom, and it took months for the ground to dry out because the water's still sloshing back and forth, and the crust of the earth was unstable. It's still unstable. The crust of the earth is still busted up. There's fault lines all over the place. The San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault. None of them are my fault, but there are faults all over the earth, and the earth's crust is still moving, and sometimes there's earthquakes and volcanoes, and those cracks are probably where the fountains of the deep broke open and the water came out. Right during the flood and right after the flood, the crust would be even more unstable. As the water under the crust is escaping, there'd be a fluid effect that would allow it to slide. That's why you get wrinkled mountains. The mountains slid in and wrinkled up, and you get wrinkled mountains in various places, sideways movement of the crust. So I think my video series covers that in seminar part 6 about the flood. What did that do anyway? Where'd the water come from? And where'd it go? And what did it do while it was here? Oh, that's classic. And the Bible says the scoffers will be ignorant of the creation and the flood. I got a picture. We're not up here on screen, are we? Okay. Tidal change in Bay of Fundy, Canada goes up and down 50 or 60 feet. So the tides going up and down and rushing in and out to fill that bump would cause all the strata that we find. There is no fossil record. The animals that are sorted, maybe maybe the herds of elephants died at the same time because they're all together. Maybe there's no people found with the elephant herd because people don't normally hang out in the middle of elephant herds. Maybe that's why there's no humans found in there, Like, duh. Are they that dumb? Go ahead, brother.
Kent, as an engineer, I've watched quite a few flume experiments, and they're not boring, mate. They're not boring, really.
Oh, the experiment is great, but the guy teaching it is... Anyway.
Okay, look, this has got something to do with it, by the way. We keep hearing this objection a number of times. They find egg nests sandwiched between layers laid down by the same flood. How do you explain the egg nests? And I believe some of the photos that I've seen, when the dinosaurs lay their eggs, they lay them in a specific pattern. And their objection is a flood would disrupt that pattern and move them around. So why do we find those egg nests in that pattern?
Well, I think you'd find even today all over the world, there are a wide range of water movements all the way from nothing to violent movement. So there might have been some times during Noah's flood when the water was not moving around violently, and other times when it was. If there was a chunk of the earth the size of Texas or the size of Australia, and it's got fault lines around it, it's a broken plate, like a piece of broken eggshell, the water is going to deposit sediments. Toward the end of the flood, that thing might tilt or shift, half a mile or kilometer for you folks. Well, if it was covered by a mile of water and it tilted, this is now going to become mountain range, and the water's going to rush off, and this is going to be ocean. It's interesting to look, nearly all the mountain ranges in the world follow the coastlines. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The Rocky Mountains follow the Pacific. The Appalachian Mountains follow the Atlantic, North Atlantic. The Alps, or the Andes Mountains, follow the South Pacific. I don't know what the name of your mountain range in Australia is, I forgot, but along the coastal range, do they call that? What do they call that one on the East Coast? Yeah. Why is it parallel with
the Great Dividing Range? But further to what you just said, I know a bit about liquefaction. You've probably heard of liquefaction.
Oh yeah.
Well, my theory is, based on what you said, the water's going up and down. If nature calls, the dinosaur will lay their eggs. Through the catastrophic process that we all know about, volcanic actions, earthquake, etc., liquefaction could literally vibrate those layers and literally sink the eggs in that formation and then get reburied by the new water that flows over the top of it. So that's been my explanation to it. Liquefaction can explain it.
Liquefaction is an amazing process. If the ground shakes in an earthquake, the water comes to the surface and buildings will sink right in. I got pictures in my seminar, giant buildings, especially in Japan, where they get earthquakes all the time. The whole building just sinks into the ground.
Yep.
Because of liquefaction. Just Google that. It's amazing phenomena that happens. I think during Noah's flood, that would be all over the world.
Matt, do you have a question?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the critics say that the fossilized coral reefs are a problem for the flood model. Is that true?
Fossil coral reefs? Now hold it. You're somebody who believes all the coral in the world fit in a dot smaller than a period, smaller than a proton. They're complaining about what? All the coral in the world came from a dot smaller than a billion times smaller than a proton. Anyway, so no, fossilized coral, during the flood in the days of Noah, the whole earth would be upset. Under the right conditions, coral can grow really fast. It depends upon the sunlight, the amount of minerals in the water that it needs, and the food supply, etc. But there have been some really rapid coral growth. So I think in the pre-flood world, there were probably large lakes or seas, but no oceans like we have today. God designed the earth to be inhabited. That's what he said so, Isaiah 45. He created it to be inhabited. Well, today, only 3% of the world is habitable. The rest is underwater or deserts or ice caps. So apparently something changed. If only 3% is habitable and God made it to be inhabited. So I don't know what the coral was like before the flood, and we've got some fossil coral here in our museum. But I guess I'd have to put that as coral growth would be phenomenal because of the greater air pressure, getting more gases diffused into the water for how many different types of coral are there? Thousands probably. So I'm not sure what their objection is, but anybody who believes they came from a dot of nothing for no reason, I'm a little reluctant to give any questions they ask any credence,
Makes
And we've got, of course, we've always heard, what about the fossil rabbit in the Precambrian? Why don't we find those fossils, and why can't we find humans and dinosaurs together in the fossil record? I know what you think about records, but they're the questions that they put forward.
Well, first of all, how do we know they haven't found these fossils together? Who's doing the counting? Because if you did find one and tried to publish a paper on it, they wouldn't publish it because it doesn't fit their preconceived idea. Secondly, there is overwhelming evidence of dinosaurs and humans living together. My video number 3 of my series is all about dinosaurs living with man. All through history, they called them dragons, called Dinosaurs and the Bible. They can get that with the seminar. We have a whole section of our museum here showing tons of evidence of humans and dinosaurs living together. A friend of mine called me. He said, Brother Hovind, I was a missionary in the Congo, Africa for 42 years, right near the equator. He said, I had pygmies in my church that killed and ate an apatosaurus. They described it, they called it a dragon or something like that, Mokele Mbembe. They said it was disturbing their fishing holes. So they put stakes across the river to keep it out of their fishing holes, and it got caught and tangled up in the stakes, and they went out there and killed it and ate it. When he showed them a picture of an apatosaurus, like a brontosaurus, they said, yeah, that's Mokele Mbembe. That's what we ate.
Man.
Still
George,
alive.
you need to find those people and see if it tasted like chicken.
Oh,
Prove your theory.
Now, can't you've probably heard of the Ashley phosphate beds and Professor Holmes?
Huh?
I'm surprised that whenever I bring that up, all they do is deny, dismiss, and reject this. I mean, I always pon this conundrum to them. The fossils that were found in that phosphate bed represent hundreds of millions of years of geological history. I always ask, how do you represent hundreds of millions of years of geology in 18 inches? They can't answer that.
Yeah, what do they say?
It. Well, if you've seen some of them, they say, invisible layers. No, the mining activity mixed all these fossils together. I said, no, but it was all found in under about 20 feet of strata in an 18-inch bed layer. They don't like the Ashley phosphate beds. They run away from it.
Right. Well, there are some places in the world where the number of fossils per square meter is mind-boggling. The Karoo Formation is another one in Africa. There are 800 million vertebrate animals, animals with a backbone, in one big formation. Well, you'd almost think there was a flood if you didn't know better.
Well, 2 Peter 3 says that the global flood being one of those events in history that they would deny. Dr. Hovind, before we end our time with you here, and as always, I appreciate you being so generous with your time. I've had this same question come in probably 5 or 6 times, just worded differently. So I think I should probably put it on screen and ask it. So their question is essentially, chimpanzees, humans, gorillas, for example, they say that they share genetic mistakes. they have some of the same defects at the same location in the DNA code. Sometimes they'll point to the gulo pseudogene, where it has to do with vitamin C synthesis, the fact that we can't synthesize vitamin C, neither can the chimpanzees. So this question has come up from some of the skeptics, thinking that this is good evidence for evolution. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that, Dr. Hovind.
Well, the DNA code, to start with, is mind-boggling in its complexity. Anybody that thinks the DNA code happened by chance really needs their head examined. It's a four-dimensional code, but the DNA code is off the charts. Our human code is, the Morse code, the codes that we make, like Morse code or our 26-letter alphabet and a code to write in, is primitive compared to the DNA code. And they think it happened by chance. So the fact that certain animals have similar problems in the same area of their DNA code, first of all, I'd like to know who's counting that, who's looking for that, and why they say that. But I'd like to have them demonstrate their point. They need to prove that. But if there are similar damage spots in different DNA codes from different animals, what would that prove? A relationship between the animals? Is that what they're saying? In any court of law, they'd laugh at that. They could have gone through the similar trauma, like maybe the worldwide flood caused something. Maybe all of a sudden a deprivation of loss of oxygen would cause a defect in that. There are a lot of things that can cause damage to the DNA code. Ask any mother that's pregnant. You got to be very careful about getting x-rayed because you're going to damage the baby or damage the DNA code. So I think that's the fact that they're claiming there are similar defects on the same part of the gene. I'd like to have that proven, first of all. But even if they could prove it, they still wouldn't prove their point that they were related somehow. I think you'll find quite a few cars have dents all over the hood after a hailstorm. If you have a hailstorm come through and your car's all dented and the neighbor's car's all dented, that proves the cars are related. No, they both went through the same tragedy called a hailstorm. So I'd really have to question, first of all, the validity of what they're saying, and then certainly question the conclusion they get from that. Even if it is true, they're still not the right conclusion.
Right. That's a great response. I've seen you point out in a debate that we hosted with you, Dr. Hovind, you pointed out to the evolutionists you were debating. You said, just because the air conditioner in my Honda Civic and my Chevy Cruze broke in the exact same way in the exact same spot doesn't mean that they evolved from a skateboard billions of years ago,
Right.
So shared defects doesn't prove that, humans and chimpanzees are related. I apologize, Matt. You're about to say something, brother?
Well, similar genes, a lot of things run in the genes, the genetic code. Diarrhea runs in your genes. So it is, that's like saying you have two books that have 20 million letters in them and you found the same typo in the same spot. Okay. There's 20 million letters in the book. Come on. This is ridiculous. I think the code is too, therefore nobody wrote the code. Is that what they're saying? Therefore, nobody wrote the DNA code. I mean, I don't think I can help a person like that.
It just shows how desperate they are to believe that, as you say, whales and pine trees are related, so desperate to reject our creator, that creator being the God of the Bible. So
well, I think that's one point I'd like to make if you're closing here, that the whole purpose of evolution is to find some way to psychologically reject the creator. When I spoke at Berkeley University, nobody would debate me at Berkeley. They asked 164 professors, one-on-one, would you debate Kent Hovind? They all refused. So the students who were doing this passed out flyers, come here, Kent Hovind, speak. The following professors refused to debate him, and listed a bunch of names on there. So I spoke for about an hour on creation. Afterwards, I'm out at my table where my videos were, people buying my books and stuff. And this big old football player from Berkeley came out. He was just shaking. He was so angry. He said, evolution is a fact. I said, well, calm down, son. Let me ask you a question. Suppose what I said tonight was true, that God made the world, and you chose to believe that God made the world. Would that change your lifestyle any? He said, man, that would change everything. I said, okay. Do you believe in evolution because you really have some evidence, or because you like the freedom it gives you from God? He said, I believe in evolution because I'm horny. I said, John, every male of every species, from termites to whales, understands that one. But there's not a reason to reject God. I mean, hello. If there's a God, then find out what he said and do it. You know, he owns it. It's a simple, it can't be more simple. There's a God. He created it. And it's common sense. If God created us, he would write a book of some kind to tell us, you know, what do you want? And I think it's his job not only to write the book, but to preserve it so I can read it. And I think he did that with the Bible in the King James Version. Actually, I take it a step further than some and say, I think that's where it's preserved, letter for letter. That's it. That's God's word. But if there's a God, it'll change your lifestyle. You have to say, okay, God, what do you want? And you read the book and he says, this is how you do it. You say, well, I don't like that. Okay, well, you want to do it God's way or not? He told you what to do. He tells you how to be a good husband, how to be a good wife, children obey your parents. I mean, there's verses in the Bible that for just about every topic, and just read it and do what it says. It'll work.
Kent, one of the evidences we present for a young Earth is the mega sequences that are laid across all the continents, and we bring up specifically the limestone layer that extends from really England through Europe, the Middle East, America, and even Australia. But they then come back and they say, well, how do you explain the existence of all the Earth's limestone? There's so much limestone. Because they point to how limestone is formed, and they say you can't get that much limestone in that short a period. And we've got explanations to that, but I'm just curious as to what your response to that argument would be.
I've never been asked that question. I have to go back and do more research. It's been years since I taught on the limestone formation. But changing temperature, changing conditions in the water, I would think if the fountains of the deep broke open and it was hot water coming up into the ocean, the temperature change would be phenomenal. Right within 50 or 100 miles of the fault lines, you would get rapid death of everything, snowing to the bottom. Like the diatomaceous earth layers in California, you know, they're hundreds of miles long and 100 feet thick. And diatoms are super tiny little microscopic critters in the water. They all died at the same time. What happened? Well, a thermal shock would do that, which would certainly happen from the fountains of the deep breaking open. Hot water shooting into the ocean. If I take a big aquarium and pour a gallon of boiling water in one end, it'll kill all the fish within a certain distance, and then pretty soon they can tolerate it. But you would get a rapid die-off within that region of the boiling water coming in. And so I think the same thing would happen with the fountains of the deep breaking open. You would get limestone and various other things that are obviously made of tiny microscopic creatures forming very rapidly. If the pre-flood world had a fruiting capacity much greater than today, you would get many more creatures living per square inch or cubic inch of water than you do today, because of just greater fruiting capacity and greater perfect living conditions for everything. So like the coal in the ground, there's a lot of coal, more coal in the earth than you could make if you did all the trees today. Every tree and bush and blade of grass in the world wouldn't make all the coal down there. I agree.
We also
go ahead.
We also spoke to John Mackay about I think maybe a month or so ago. And I spoke to him personally when he came to visit his family here in Australia. And we also spoke to Bob Banyard and Brian Nicol, who you might know from your Wild Brown days. They also say that limestone can be a chemical process. They have observed limestone formation during volcano eruptions. And they say that the majority of the limestone was actually a chemical process during the flood.
Just calcium carbonate, or what are they saying? Different chemicals combining. So it's not from living organisms. Is that what they're saying?
Yes, calcium carbonate. Yeah.
Well, many organisms in the sea have to take the calcium and make their own calcium carbonate for their shells, and their body structure is made up of that. So some limestone may be from. I was just reading a couple months ago about the chalk cliffs of Dover, you know, and the different types of chalk that they have. And I don't know, I have to do some more reading on that, but I don't see a problem. I know the Bible says the scoffers are ignorant of the flood. And the flood answers so much. The rapid temperature change within 50 miles of these cracks would kill all that stuff. But the chemical reaction one, You probably have to ask the folks like at ICR or Henry Morris or those the group that he started. They would have.
I call those shooting yourself in the foot questions, because by the same token, we find fossils buried in limestone, and according to their deposition rates, limestone forms at 1 to 2 centimeters per 1,000 years. So how can you fossilize, say, a huge creature at those kind of rates?
It had to lay there for thousands of years and slowly get fossilized.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you point out, Kent, though, those fossils of fish being eaten and fish giving birth. I guess the birthing process took millions and millions of years. So
they believe it. That's why I say evolution. You have to have a special kind of stupid to believe that. I just have a hard time understanding how anybody with one eye and half a brain can believe such a dumb idea. Everything came from nothing. One guy said just today in the program I was listening into that it wasn't a big bang, it was a rapid expansion.
Right.
Where it went from the size of a dot to billions of light years across instantly. So the matter is being accelerated faster than the speed of light. It's hard enough to get light to go the speed of light, and now you want to get matter to go thousands of times faster than the speed of light? And they don't see a problem with that.
No,
I don't understand.
Willingly ignorant. Well, I want to point out, Dr. Hovind, that we had you booked for an hour, and we're almost at an hour and a half mark. So as I always say, thanks so much for your generosity in giving us your time. We've had a great chat today, roughly 70 people with probably about 1,000 more questions. So we could probably do this for 10 hours. We'll start winding it down because I know how busy you are. I want to get to at least this last question because it is a super chat for $10. And then I think we'll call it a night because, like I said, you've been so generous with your time. The questioner in the super chat asks if there were baby Leviathan on the ark, in your opinion.
Well, Noah took everything on the ark that was on dry land and had nostrils. It says all those in whose nostrils. So I believe Leviathan, mentioned several times in the Bible, might have been a creature in the sea. So if it was a sea-dwelling creature, it would not need to go on the ark. There are some air-breathing sea-dwelling creatures like porpoises and dolphins, and whales. The fact that they breathe air doesn't mean they have to go on the ark. They have to be land-dwelling, all those on land, in whose nostrils is the breath of life. So the best theory I have on that is that Leviathan is probably something like a T-Rex, which might have been a water-dwelling creature or something like that. We'll have to wait and see.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for answering that last question. And like I said, I want to thank the audience as well for so many good questions, super stickers, super chats. I want to thank Matt and George as well. Matt, George, did you guys have any final words, final comments before I think we shut it down for the night?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Dr. Hovind, when he was in Australia, did you ever try cooked galah?
There are quite a few of your foods over there I did not try. I didn't understand I couldn't understand what they were saying.
Well,
and I sure didn't like the look of it or smell of it. So
I'll tell you where I'm going with this. There is a process of cooking the galah. Okay, an Aboriginal told me this. What you got to do, obviously, you got to kill the galah and defeather it, remove all the feathers. You have to cook. You have to heat up the stone so hot that it's almost glowing. You put the galah on top of that rock, and after about 5 minutes, you flip it over. Once the galah is cooked, he says you throw the galah away and you eat the rock.
Okay.
So good thing you didn't try any.
Sorry.
Well, that's why we pay you the big bucks, George. You're the comedian of the team, so I appreciate that. And Brother Matt, any final words, comments?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for posting Matt Powell's movie on the atheist religion. That was a good one. He came over, and unfortunately, he lost a lot of your content, I heard. Didn't back it up on his computer, so that's why you weren't in it. Bummer. But thanks for putting that on your channel. That was great.
All right.
And Dr. Hovind, Once again, thanks so much for joining us. God bless you as always. Any final words, comments?
Well, yeah, bring everybody down to Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. Go to drdino.com or call us 855-BIG-DINO. I'm extension 3. Take calls all day long and half the night. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. God bless you, and God bless everybody in the chat.